I appreciate that, and apologies once again. So my name is Karim. I am an Agile coach and trainer based out of the UK in London. Nice sunny London today, at least anyway, at least for one day. I've been around the space for many years. I think I became a Scrum Master in about 2008. So I'm doing more leadership and executive coaching for the last 10 years or so. So this is the stuff I love. I love business agility. I love agile leadership. I love transforming organizations. And so I'm going to run you through a few points that I think are interesting. I may turn it around to you to answer a few questions here and there. I won't make you do too much work. I know you've been working all day. So I just might ask you to write one or two things in the chat, if that's all right, and then we can take it from there. If you have questions, feel free to save those up. I'm gonna try and save some time at the end for some questions. But other than that, I'm going to flick you right over. I'm going to just be running through a slide deck, so I think the slides will be more interesting to look at than my face, probably. Let's go straight away. Now, this is the journey to agile leadership, whatever that means. Now, I'm going to start with a little bit of military history, if I may. Some 15th century military history. In the late 15th century, the primary weapon of war carried by infantrymen was the pike. You can see it there. It's a long pointy stick, and they used to do battle with the other side. It's quite hard to find pictures from the 16th century and the 15th century. So I know I had to AI generate one. So there you go. There's the medieval battle underway, and they spent a long time analyzing the best way to line up. What's the best way to line up so that we have an advantage over the other side? And they found the best way, and they lined up in that way. And very early in the 16th century, the musket was invented. Now, the musket is an early form of rifle, right? So you're doing battle from a distance now, but they continued to line up in exactly the same way. And actually, they continued to line up in exactly the same way for 100 years. And it took 100 years and 2 generations of European commanders to move on before anybody asked the question, why do they line up like this? Why do we line up like this? Why this formation? And they traced it all the way back, and they found that it was the perfect way to do things 100 years ago. Well, back then we had the pike, we had a pointy stick, and now we've got rifles. So why do we line up in the same way? Now, I find this little nugget of history interesting because it shows us that the dominant paradigm is handed down from generation to generation to generation. Very rarely does anybody question the status quo. Why do we do it like this? And the same is true of how we lead our organizations, management. You know, most of the tools and techniques of management we use today were created between about 1890 and 1920. That's over 120 years ago, 130 years ago, and lots of them are still in use today. So what was happening back then? We had low-skilled, uneducated people doing manual, repetitive work. Now, I'm going to assume that's not who's in the room. I think in the room, we probably have some educated, highly skilled people doing creative knowledge work. It's a very different thing. But why do we assume the old techniques will work? And really what we're here to talk about is a new way to lead our organizations, agile leadership, and how we can transform towards that. So my first question to you to put into the chat, what is leadership? Not necessarily agile leadership, but what is this concept called leadership? Who wants to throw something into the chat to answer that question? I'm going to make you do some work. Maybe not so many. Maybe some people are typing. Okay, being a role model. Thanks for that. Aspiration. Thank you, Polly. If I say anybody's name wrongly, I do apologize. The ability to influence, yeah, I like that. Influence people in order to get some outcome, right? Again, inspiration. We influence through inspiring. Inspiration, vulnerability, not typically back in the history anyway, associated with strong leadership. More so these days. The practice of leading others in a way that works. Well, I guess good leadership is that, yeah. People over process. All right, you're already talking about what agile leadership looks like. So when we're talking about, for me, leadership, make people cooperate, yeah, or invite people to cooperate, influence people such that they cooperate. Yeah, great stuff. Thank you. I'm now going to invite you to answer this question: what is agile leadership, and how does it differ from traditional leadership? What are the differences, do we think? I'll make you type again. Sorry about that. Find things around, quickly adopt to new territories. Okay, so a leadership style that allows us to be nimble. Yeah, I think that's true. So leading an organization towards agility could be considered agile leadership. What else? Cooperation, accepting change, driving change even. Servant leadership, that's a good old paper from way back then. Having a common purpose. Right, so there's a lot of overlap between what you talk about leadership, using agile principles in the practices of leadership. Yeah, I like that. So for me, agile leadership is about how we lead in the context of high uncertainty, high volatility, high complexity, in order to create organizations that are engaging, that are innovative, that are adaptive, that can respond to whatever strategic challenge comes around the corner. And that's not the same as management throughout history. So we're going to be unpicking this a little bit as we go. So what are we going to cover? Thank you for that, by the way. I'll let you relax for a little bit now. How traditional management emerged, traditional, i.e. the sort of the management that we generally see. 3 key mindset shifts of agile leadership, and some bit more context around that. And how to manage people for growth and engagement, which is a key part of any agile leadership journey. So I'll start with a story. This is very serious stuff. This is we'll take you back to June 2021. They're my little babies, not so little babies now, 3 years on, bit bigger babies. But the family, we'd been going through COVID, as I said, everybody else, and we'd been locked down a lot. And this is we're kind of getting back out into the world. But at this point, we decided we were going to have a sunflower growing competition. And the 4 of us, my wife, me, and my two girls, we all planted a sunflower, as you can see. You don't want to see me and my wife yet, right? So, and we wanted to see whose was going to grow the highest. And as you can see, my youngest, hers was the smallest, and she wasn't happy about this because she's the smallest, and she thought it was unfair that her sunflower was the smallest. So, and she must have been about, I don't know, 6 there. What is she now? 9. Yeah, all right, 3 years ago, she was 6. And I saw her at one point playing with her flower. It looked like she was trying to stretch it or maybe pull it, make it grow faster. I don't know what goes on in a baby's head. And I asked what she was doing. And she said, Daddy, how can I make it grow faster? And I said, well, I don't think you can make it grow faster. All you can do is give it the food it needs, the light it needs, the water it needs, the environment it needs, and then it will grow. In short, you can't command the flower to grow. You can't fix the flower. You have to fix the environment in which the flower is growing, which kind of reminded me of an organization. You can't command collaboration. You can't command in a particular culture. You can't command innovation. All you can do as a leader is create the environment in which those things are more likely to happen. So in a sense, we often talk about leadership, agile leadership being like more of a gardener, right? You're creating the environment for things to happen rather than forcing those things. So there you go, leadership lessons from a 6-year-old girl. So the evolution of leadership over the years. Now, it's tempting to think that that leadership or management has always been there, and in many ways it has. We're evolved from hunter-gatherer foragers, and for a good couple of 100,000 years, that's what we were as Homo sapiens, and even millions of years before that as primates. Hunter-gatherer foragers where small bands of maybe 20, 30 people collaborated to get stuff done. No real leadership, very cooperative. Now, around 10,000 BC, the agricultural revolution made land an important commodity. It's an important commodity when you're farming. It's not so much when you're hunter-gatherer foraging, because you could just roam the land. You don't need to own it. When you're farming, you need to own the land. So this led to conflicts. This is kind of where wars started, right? Because tribes needed more land and they came into conflict with one another. And that meant that there were wars. And then one tribe would conquer another tribe, they would get bigger. And when you're fighting wars, you need weapons and you need to centralize. And then you get bigger and bigger cities and more centralization, more and more hierarchy begins. And this is where us as Homo sapiens, we start to, after the agricultural revolution, big cities start emerging and we start having centralized hierarchical leadership. Not particularly democratic, I have to say, but there was a centralized leadership, right? So 10,000 years is a blink of an eye in terms of evolution. The next important phase was kind of about 1890, the second industrial revolution, the era of mass production. This is where people like Frederick Winslow Taylor, Henry Fayol, Max Weber, Henry Ford are going into organizations and telling people how to do the work to help them be more productive. It's that I'll do the thinking and planning, you do the doing. It's that the organization is like a body and you've got the brains at the top and everything else just follows orders. They're just kind of mindlessly moving around. And that's really how organizations functioned from 1890 for the next 60, 70 years or so. All right, with this, manager does the thinking and the planning, workers do the doing, and the separation there. We still see a lot of that in organizations. The power is concentrated at the top. Then, of course, in the 50s and 60s, what you had was the Toyota production system, lean production, where, based on the work of W. Edwards Deming and Toyota and Taiichi Ohno and these folks, workers started to be empowered because they started to get these quality issues. They started to empower workers to fix the processes, to fix these quality issues. And so what we had was more engagement and a Toyota production system that evolved, continuous improvement, Kaizen, all of these things start to come in and around the 50s. At the same time, you had the human side of enterprise being published in 1960, which talked about theories X and Y. We start to focus more on people now. And then, of course, we have from 2000, maybe a little bit later, but oops, dipsy. I'm going to stop there and I'm just going to delete that for a second as that doesn't say what I want it to say. Agile leadership. And so we saw a new leadership style, self-management teams coming from Scrum and moving through to the third decade of this century. We really are seeing Agile leadership accelerating now, which is great. So, why has that happened? Why have we moved away from this command and control Taylorism to Agile leadership? For me, there are three reasons. You've got increased complexity of the work, and the work that we're doing is not production line, it's not working in factories. The work that we're doing is highly creative knowledge work, new technologies, greater interconnectedness. This is very, very different to a factory worker. We're highly skilled, educated people. We've got increased frequency and urgency of the decision making. Back in the day, you could make decisions quickly, but what we couldn't do was make lots and lots of decisions all the time. It was too difficult to do. So now there are so many decisions. We can't get quick decisions. We can't get effective decisions from one person. And finally, widespread disengagement. People are chronically disengaged. They don't like working, they aren't working hard, they aren't motivated, not because they're intrinsically demotivated, just because they are so chronically disempowered. So we need to fix these problems. And Gary Hamel puts it rather nicely here. All right, so what I'm going to do now is walk through the three key mindset shifts of moving towards Agile leadership to solve some of these problems. So let's go. Here's what I think the three key mindset shifts are, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each. I can't talk a lot about each, but I can talk a little bit about each. So first things first, we need to focus now less on the work. So it's the opposite of what Frederick Taylor was saying. Less on the work, more on the culture, the strategy, on the structures and the policies, or more on creating the environment rather than telling people what to do. Then we need to decentralize as much decision-making as possible. That is, push the decision-making down to where the information is. Again, that's the opposite of what the early pioneers were talking about. And then we need to encourage and support the growth and development of those around us. That is the coaching style of leadership that we talk about, the servant leadership, the leader as a coach style. So I'm going to run through these three things, and I'm going to talk about one or two things in there that I think are interesting in a person's journey. So we're going to start here. The focusing less on the work. See, for me, Agile leadership is about articulating an inspiring vision and empowering others to make it a reality. But we need to create a culture of collaboration. We need to create a culture of safety. We need to create a culture of experimentation and learning in order to create an environment whereby people can respond to whatever strategic challenge comes around the corner. Now, a piece of research that I stumbled across some years ago comes from the future of management. And Gary Hamel did this research, and he looked at these words: intellect, obedience, creativity, diligence, passion, and initiative. And again, these are all interesting words. But what he was interested in finding was which of these words gives more of a competitive advantage to an organization. So, for example, if we focus on intellect, will we be more effective and successful? If we focus on obedience, will we be more effective and successful? And so on and so forth. And what he found was there was a hierarchy of human capability. So he said, obedience, well, this will give you almost no competitive advantage. Clearly, because everybody has obedience. Diligence, the same. Intellect will give you a bit. But what really matters is initiative, creativity, and passion. Initiative. Do people take initiative and do things? Are they creative with their solutions? Are they passionate about what you're doing in the organization? Now, what I find interesting is when I work with leaders, they always say that those ones at the top are the most important. Those ones at the bottom are the least. I don't even show them this, but when I give them this to sort, they'll tell me that initiative, creativity, passion with a bit of intellect, that's what makes organizations tick. That's what makes the most effective organizations on the planet succeed. And then I ask them the question, which do you manage for in your organization? If you look at the processes, the rules, how you lead your organization, which of these things are you focusing on? Invariably, they smile and they say obedience and diligence. But we know that what really matters is initiative, creativity, and passion. But yet there are almost no policies in our organization to boost initiative, to boost creativity, to boost passion. In fact, we ask people to leave these things at the door. So a great Agile leader is going to be, all right, sure, some obedience, we need to obey the law, and there are some rules we need to obey, but we need to dial that back. And what we really need to do is create a space for those more important things to flourish, to incentivize those things, to encourage those things, to say, hey, you've got a great idea, go away and try it, go away and run that experiment. Otherwise, we end up here. You've probably all seen this. I'll skip over this, right? But 15% of people in the organization engaged, 2/3 of people not engaged, 18% actively disengaged. This is globally, right? It's a bit worse in Europe. It's a bit better in the US. There are some new figures out. They haven't changed very much. So we're really not doing very well. And at this point, I'm going to pause. It's time to ask you another question. And the question I'm going to ask is this. I don't need to stop my slides, do I? I'll just ask you to put it in the chat. When you've been super engaged, as in you've been at work, you can't tear yourself away from your computer. You're so engaged in what you're doing. You're giving your discretionary effort. You're feeling hyper motivated. What has been the driver of that? Like, what drives that? What did you have in your organization that made you want to do that? Write some things in the chat if you could be so kind, and I'll read them out as they come through, because I'm interested in what you think drives engagement. Difficult question. Know the why. Yeah. Okay. So to really understand what you're trying to achieve, new challenges, community, that's a people thing, ownership, autonomy. Autonomy comes up a lot. Oh, they're coming thick and fast here. I have to scroll back. Support and the listening ear, being heard, being noticed, Yeah, KPIs, really knowing what you're trying to achieve. Yep. Listening. Yeah, all of these things, right? And so these things come from leadership. These things come from people articulating what you're trying to achieve and helping you to move in that direction. And the culture that's created in the leadership behaviors and the culture on the team, working on something innovative. Yeah, I think all of these things. You know, for me, one of the most important things you do as a leader, other than articulating the vision and the strategy and helping people know what they're trying to achieve, is to create a culture. Is to create a culture of engagement, of experimentation, of psychological safety. And for me, over the years, I've looked at many models. These are the drivers of engagement. And you know, the ones outside the line are hygiene factors. I'll ignore those. You have to have them. But the ones inside, these are the things that boost engagement. Do we have autonomy? Are we able to be open, or do we have to wear a mask? Is there trust and transparency in the organization both ways? Do we have a level of psychological safety? I'll touch more on that in a minute. Now, are people showing recognition and gratitude for a job well done? Do you feel valued? Do you feel you're able to learn and to grow? Do you feel like there's a shared value and purpose? I think we kind of touched on that. Do we feel like we're treated fairly? And do we have a sense of belonging and connection? These, for me, are the things that drive engagement. If we can focus on these as leaders, then the motivation, the intrinsic motivation, is going to come out in people. And remember, when we're looking at the organization, most of the faults lie in the system. So, you know, fixing the system rather than the people is a really key message here. So I want to get into how we decentralize decision making safely. So we've touched a little bit on focusing less on the work, more on creating the environment. Now, I want to focus on how we decentralize decision making. It's a really key part of Agile leadership because we can't make all the decisions, so we need to decentralize. And the first thing to say is those early management pioneers weren't trying to solve this problem. They weren't trying to get people to think creatively. They wanted them to show up on time, do what they were told, and then go home. That's it. And so they were focused on compliance. And so a lot of the leadership techniques we see are focused on compliance, obedience, and diligence, you know, the stuff that doesn't really matter. So we're going to look at how we can get people to think creatively. And to do that, we need to understand a little bit about the brain. Now, when my wife was pregnant with my eldest daughter, right, this is 2012, probably about this time, Easter time, 2012, we went on a trip to the East Coast of the States. We did New York, we did DC, we did a bit of Shenandoah National Park. And we were walking around the national park. It's not like the UK where you everywhere you go, you see people, right? There's nobody there. You're walking around, you don't see people for miles. And we walked around a corner. It was just me and my wife. And she was about 13, 14 weeks pregnant. And we turned the corner, and I'm not kidding, we saw the most enormous giant black bear. Well, I say the most enormous. I've only ever seen one black bear, and it was this one. But it seemed like it was enormous. It towered over me. It was kind of about the size of that. And at this point, you start thinking, oh dear, that's a black bear. It could eat me very easily. And it looked straight at me. It looked at me. It didn't care about my wife. And at this point, my limbic system takes over, right? A part of my limbic system. My amygdala is sending a fight, flight, or freeze response to keep me safe. That's one of the things it does. All right. And so it flooded my bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline ready to fight, flight, or freeze. Although obviously none of those things would work. Thankfully, the bear turned around and carried on eating, and we walked off slowly and survived to tell the tale. But you know what's interesting is how quickly and easily we go into that state. Now, I'll come back to the limbic system in a minute. I want to talk about the prefrontal cortex now. Because while the limbic system deals with emotions, it deals with keeping us safe, moving us away from threats, moving us towards rewards. The prefrontal cortex deals with deciding, understanding, recalling, understanding, memorizing, and inhibiting. And some combination of those things allows us to grasp abstract concepts, solve complex problems, think creatively, make plans to move towards a goal, and to act appropriately. Hands up if you need to do those things at work. Grasp abstract concepts, solve complex problems, think creatively, make plans to move towards a goal. Yeah, I'm just kidding. Of course, that's all we do at work, right? Now, so this 5% of the brain is incredibly important. It's incredibly powerful. However, when we go into a fight, flight, or freeze mode, the neurological pathways to our prefrontal cortex are inhibited. That means we don't think straight anymore. In fact, if any of you have ever gone to give a talk or to take an exam or do something nerve-wracking and your mind has gone blank, you can't think of anything, this is what's happening. Your brain is shutting down your prefrontal cortex, right? Which is bad. It's bad if you want to decentralize decision-making to people and they can't use their brains. So what we need to do as leaders is to understand what sends people into a threat state. And it's not just big black bears, okay? We as humans cannot differentiate between a primary threat to life, bear in the woods, and a social threat. That is a threat to our status, our certainty, our autonomy, our relatedness, our connection to people, or the fairness, right? So every single day, if we don't create an environment of psychological safety, then people's prefrontal cortex, their cognitive function is going to diminish and they're going to be less good at their job. So one of the things we have to do as a leader is to create the environment for creativity and thinking. And that means people have to feel safe. They have to feel included. They have to feel autonomous. They have to feel safe in the people they're with. So again, this comes from the top, how you show up at work as a leader, how you interact, the language that you use, and the language that you tolerate other people using. So one to note there, the more people are stressed, the worse they perform, the less you can decentralize decision-making. So if we want to decentralize decision-making, we need to bear that in mind. Now, it used to be so easy. We used to have the information move up to the authority, decision made, and then commands come back down. And this works for simple, repetitive work. As I've said, when we get more complex, when we have to make more decisions, no one person can have the cognitive capacity, the knowledge of all the activities happening, and the sheer physical presence to make all of those decisions. So you don't have to move information to the authority, you have to move the authority to the information. That is, we need to empower people. We need to empower people to be better. And again, this is how you work with dynamic, complex knowledge work. Now, it's not this simple because sometimes you get this response. No, thank you. You make the decision. I'll just do what I'm told. So my next question to you is this. Why does it happen sometimes? Because we know that autonomy is important to humans. We know that. So if that's true, why does some people not want to take accountability, not want to take responsibility? I'll invite you to put your answers in the chat again, if you would. This is an important point. This comes up again and again and again when I work with teams. No, thank you. That's what you're paid to do. Any ideas? They don't want the blame. Yes. And a culture of blame is fear of failure. Yeah. And you know, if you're in a blame culture, then fear of the consequences. Yeah, you're right. If you're in an organization where you make that decision and you are punished for things going wrong, you're just going to say, tell me what to do, and then you take the blame. So one of the things you have to do as the leader is to create that psychological safety, that freedom of from consequence. Obviously, consequences are always there, but we don't blame, we don't punish mistakes. We learn and we grow and we celebrate the fact. Yeah, imposter syndrome as well. You know, sometimes people just don't feel like they belong. All right. So first things first, we need to create an environment of safety so people can think straight, think clearly, and we need to create an environment of safety whereby people don't feel that they will be punished for making a wrong decision. And again, that's really important. That has to come from the leadership. So I call this the house of self-managing teams. It's not the prettiest picture in the world. I understand this. However, It gets the information across. For me, this is what needs to be in place before you decentralize decision making. We need a foundation of trust, of transparency, and of psychological safety. That has to be there for people to think creatively and to want to take on that accountability. Then, of course, we need clarity and alignment around the objectives. If we're not all clear what we're trying to achieve, how on earth are we supposed to achieve it? So leaders' job, communicate clearly and over again. I think somebody said before the why, right? Why, what, on what measures do we judge ourselves by success? We need to know super clear what we're trying to achieve. And we need to know that people have the capability to do it. And if they don't, we need to help them to get the capability to do it, right? There's no point in telling someone to do something that they don't have the skills to do. We have to help them get the skills. We have to recognize when they're not there. We have to put those skills in place as leaders. So competence and clarity, those of you familiar with David Marquet's work will be familiar with those two things. Then we need to give the team the right tools, obviously. Then we need to have aligned incentives. Aligned incentives. Look, I might have trust, transparency, and psychological safety on the team. I might know exactly what we're trying to achieve. I might have all of the skills necessary, all of the resources necessary. If it's in my best interest, for my pay, for my promotion, for my progression, for my bonus, to do something else, I'm going to do something else. Probably. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll be in an altruistic mood. But most people are going to do what they're incentivized to do. So if we don't align the interests of the individual, the team, and the organization, we're going to see people going off in different directions. We have to get away from individual incentives, individual productivity metrics, towards team-based and even team of team-based outcomes so that we can get people aligned. Really, really important HR piece there. And finally, somebody moving barriers out the way, whether you call that person a Scrum Master, an Agile coach, a team lead, a manager, I don't care what you call them, as long as somebody's doing it, that's what counts. Now, when I hear my teams aren't delivering, almost certainly one of those pillars or the foundation is missing, normally more than one. So it's your job as a leader, there's no such thing as a bad team, it's just bad leadership. You haven't put the right stuff in place for that to work. You need to work harder at getting those things in place. Growing people's capability, making sure they're aligned, creating that psychological safety. Incredibly important. So that's the decentralizing decision-making. Once you have those things in place, you'll find people welcome the autonomy and they go in the direction you expect them to go in. Why? Because they know what they're trying to achieve. Now, this third piece is in many ways the hardest piece, because this is the coaching piece, right? This is about how do we help to grow the capability of those around us. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the HR practices that might need to evolve, but taking a coaching stance and helping to grow the capability of people, there are going to be some impacts on HR and how we do reviews and assessments and growth. So, work with HR on this. But this is the quote I like from Bill Joyner. The higher you go in an organization, the more your success depends on making other people successful, creating the environment for other people to be successful, but coaching and mentoring other people, helping to grow them, move them to new heights. That's the secret source of leadership, because you could be really smart, but if people around you aren't, then what good is that? Imagine 10 smart people versus one smart person. Imagine 100 smart people versus one smart person. And then you start to get the idea of why this is so powerful. So those of you, this is the Agile Coaching Practice Greece meetup. So the word coaching is in there, and I'm going to assume that a lot of you have at least some background in coaching or are aware of some of the techniques in coaching, right? But, for me, first things first, you need to be excellent at building rapport and establishing a safe environment when you're in those one-on-one sessions. Really, really key. You don't have rapport, people won't relax, they won't open up. Then it's about listening to truly understand, right? Well, some people listen in order to talk over people, and some people listen to truly understand. And it's a really powerful gift. If you can listen to people, you really can truly understand them. Then you're asking those, you're helping to clarify their goals. What is it you want to achieve? Where are you? Where do you want to go? Asking some powerful questions, and we all probably do that already, to generate insights. How could you go from where you are to where you want to be? A lot of this is just the grow model. And then there's holding people to account, right? Being a coach isn't all about being soft and fluffy. It's about holding people to account for taking actions to move towards the things they've told you are important. Okay, and so if you are, and of course, this isn't even talking about giving advice and mentoring and helping to teach people certain techniques. This is just about taking the coaching stance and helping people to grow. And I think there's not enough of this. Managers aren't close enough to the workers in order to do this. They're in meeting after meeting after meeting, and they're just never there. And so having someone who's helping you grow in your career, I think, is a real gift. And remember, the better you make everyone else, the better they will make you look at the end of the year as the leader of that team or that department or that organization. So coaching skills, I think, for me, the number one thing. Yes, culture is important. Yes, strategy is important. Yes, communication is important, but coaching, absolutely vital. And on a similar note, I think the continuous conversations and feedback are really important. Gone are the days where you can wait until we've rotated around the sun before you give somebody feedback on how they're doing, right? Annual reviews are just so far out in the future that they're almost pointless. So continuous coaching and continuous feedback become really important. So Netflix has a nice model for this. It's the 4 A's. 2 A's are for the giver and 2 A's are for the receiver. So what they say is, firstly, aim to assist. So you've got to give feedback with positive intent. Don't just be like telling people that they're awful. Hey, you have to be saying this with a genuine desire to help somebody improve. Otherwise, people know that intent is not there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to make it actionable. There's no point in just saying, hey, you suck, or, oh, that wasn't very good, was it? Right? That's really not helpful. So what we need is, hey, have you thought about next time doing it like this? I thought that you were a bit X, Y, and Z. Maybe if you did this, you might get a better result. I don't know, whatever that is, right? So you kind of aim to assist and you make your feedback actionable, something that they can do, right, differently. You don't change without changing. And then the receiver, firstly, appreciates that feedback. Thank you for feedback. Not debating it, not arguing back. You show your appreciation for the feedback. You say, thank you. I will consider that. And then at some point in the future, you either accept the feedback or you discard the feedback. Maybe you disagree with it. That's fine. You don't have to go with it, right? But I think this is a nice little model. By the way, this isn't just manager to workers or individual contributors. This goes both ways. This goes all ways, right? So people in your team should feel safe to give you feedback as well, because you're not perfect. You're a manager. It doesn't mean that you're a genius and perfect in every way. So I think this is a nice little model. The more we normalize this, the more we make this okay, the more people will give each other feedback. And I think that's a really important part. It's an important part of the Agile movement, never mind the Agile leadership. So incorporating this, super important. And remember, the better people get, the more you can decentralize decision-making, the faster and better the decisions that will be taken. So these are all interconnected. Now, one thing that is interesting for me, and this, I don't want to talk too long because I know I turned up late and it's now coming up 7:20 for you folks. You're probably hungry. So that's my way of saying I'm hungry too. But this is really interesting because this is true of all relationships, right? Focus on strengths instead of weaknesses when evaluating performance. You should be giving 5 bits of praise to every 1 bit of maybe you could improve here, right? Now, this is true of all relationships, husbands, wives. Have a think about whether you, how often you criticize versus how often you praise. Parents and children, it's so easy to just be on your child's back because they didn't do their homework very well, their room's a mess, they didn't tidy up the table, they spilt something somewhere. It's always, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, right? And it's often the same in organizations. You're told when you do things wrong. You're very rarely told when you do things well. So as a leader, your job is to focus on 5 to 1 as a minimum of positive praise to criticism. And of course, feel free to praise publicly, but if you're going to criticize, do that privately, I would suggest. Otherwise, you might send people into that threat state we talked about earlier, like a black bear is around the corner. So something to ponder when you're looking at giving feedback. So a whistle-stop tour of some of the tools and techniques of Agile leadership here. I just want to recap this very quickly. Traditional management is designed for simple, repetitive manual labor. We are using a tool, a technique that is at least 50 years out of date, probably 70 years out of date. It worked well at the time. It's time to move past the production line, tailorist view of the world. Agile leadership is about creating the environment for success, the environment to respond to whatever strategic challenge comes around the corner. It's about decentralizing decision-making. It's about growing the capability of those around you. And in order to do those things, you need lots of skills. But for me, the one I pick out here is coaching skills. The ability to help people identify their goals, to help them work towards their goals, to give great feedback, to grow the capability of those around you so that when you decentralize, they make even better decisions than you do. And in the end, it comes down to choice, right? So do we want to engage in the leadership of yesterday? Or do we want to engage in the leadership of tomorrow? And there needs to be a gap between where you are and where you want to be for you to go on this journey. And it's a journey, and it is a journey. It's a journey on which we all have to go, or we may not go, but some of us may choose to go. The choice to trust people, the choice to believe in people, the choice to believe that the team can do great work if only you create the environment and get out of the way. For me, that's what Agile leadership is about. That's what Scrum Master is about. That's what Agile coaching is about. And that's what 21st century high-performing Agile leadership is about. So hopefully that's given you some food for thought and some things to take away and go and research. But that's really all I wanted to say. And I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions or engage in some discussion and debate with anybody who has questions. So that is all from me, folks. I don't know how you do questions. Maybe you stick them in the chat, or maybe you probably have a more sophisticated way. So I'll let the facilitators take over from this point.
Thank you so much. I think it was a fast and vast amount of information. So thanks for this, quite interesting. So who wants to come up with a question? Either online or here?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, Karim.
Hello.
Thank you so much for the presentation and the way you shared all that information. It's very inspiring. It definitely brought energy in the room because it's late here. So thank you. I have a question from your experience when you're speaking to leaders. Do you ever get yeah, that's all nice and good, but what about financial aspects of company product delivery and how they can manage their resources and things like that?
Yes, I do. Now, one of, I kind of use a model when I work with leaders that I call the 6 enablers of business agility. Governance and funding is one of the things, as is leadership and management, as is culture, HR, org structure, various things. So yeah, but there are ways of doing finance that is a decentralized way, right? And for me, if you are engaging in things like lean startup, things like design thinking, where you are having ideas and you're testing them cheaply, you can run a lot of experiments. You can decentralize because all those experiments are really small amount of money, right? It's not like we're asking for €1 million to go and run an experiment. It's like 200 euros, 1,000 euros, right? And when you're spending small amounts, you can decentralize that to people and they can come back with evidence and then you give them a bit more, and then they come back, and then you give them a bit more. So yes, finance needs to be involved, as do various others. And you know, you can say, well, we're highly regulated. It's like, well, yeah, that doesn't mean you can't empower people, though, because the regulators don't say all decisions have to come from managers. There's nowhere that says that, right? And actually, when you do decentralize, you often get better ideas and better decision making anyway. So what you need is transparency. Obviously, people can't just go off and do whatever they like. We need to know what they're spending. We need to know what they're doing. We need to know what outcomes they're trying to achieve. And we have a constant conversation. So yes, I do get that, but I think those are very easy to get around. If you look, it's really easy to let people experiment with a small amount of money, right? And when you start talking about that, people relax a little bit, and you know that some will fail, and you know that some will succeed. So it's an important point, and one that does come up indeed. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, great.
I think there was a question in the chat. We go thinking presentation. How can you? Okay. How you can inspire people when there are lots of years in the same company? Our way of thinking. Yeah, do you know what? I don't tend to see it as my job to inspire people to change. I mean, hopefully I can sometimes, but it's incredibly rare that somebody else's words can inspire you to change. You know, unless you are President Obama and you are the most incredibly gifted orator, which I'm not, but I try. But, you know, I don't think it's actually my job to inspire people. I help people understand what they're trying to achieve, and I help them understand how they might achieve those things. But this is a journey that individuals have to go on themselves, and they have to want to go on it themselves, right? It's like, how can I inspire you to run a marathon? You either want to do that or you don't, and nothing I say is going to change your mind. So, you know, I think we sometimes give a bit too much, puts a bit too much on what a coach's words can be. A coach is there to help you do what you already want to do. And if you don't want to do it, if there's no gap between where you are and where you want to be, you're comfortable, you're happy, you probably won't do it. And that maybe is okay. It might not be okay for your organization, and maybe that could be a problem in a long time. But not everyone wants to go on this journey. Not everyone will go on this journey. And that's fine. You know, I'll help the people who do. That's really what I try to do. So yeah, I don't know is the answer to that question. I haven't found that way. There's another question in the chat here. How should we approach the situation where, although the creative and innovation is displayed by a person, but the productivity targets are set by the company and not met? Yeah. In the ideal world, the person qualities are on the top, right? So you're saying there's a mismatch between the organizational metrics and the things we talked about. Yes, you're absolutely right. There are. And I think I kind of touched on that, right? We don't measure creativity, initiative, passion. And Simon Sinek talks about this. You know, we've got all the metrics in the world to measure performance and nothing to measure trust. And actually, I'd rather have the high trust, mediocre performer than the high performer, low trust person. But we don't value it in organizations. So we need to start. And this is one of the things that I say to people when we're trying to change culture. One of the things that changes culture, well, before you change culture, you have to change behaviors. And how do you change behaviors? You have to change what you measure, your metrics, your targets, your incentives. Because if you're telling me I need to collaborate, yet you're measuring me by lines of code written, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to write lines of code and I'm not going to collaborate. So HR, which is why I said HR needs to come along, incentives, productivity, all of these things need to be torn up and started again with the kind of behaviors we want to see. What kind of culture do we want? What kind of behaviors do we believe will lead to that culture? And then how can we create a system whereby people are more likely to behave in that way? And that is, I think, what you're saying, right? The metrics need to be aligned with that. Otherwise, people are going to do what their productivity targets say they should do, right? And I don't blame them, because I like getting bonuses as well. So yes, that's why HR need to be involved. Sorry, that was a long answer to a question, but hopefully answered the question. Are there any more questions?
We have one more question from the room.
I have to. Okay, it's a kind of the reverse question to the previous one. So let's suppose that we have a case of a leader that is very successful in business results with the old way. How can you convince him or her that a change in the leadership style could benefit more? Because you know what how the saying goes: if you have a team that wins, you never change it.
Yeah, like Arsenal. Sorry, I have to give my local team a plug. Well, so the question is, you know, if something's working, why would you want to change it? I guess is the first answer. Now, the answer to that question might be because we could be even better. Now, so maybe that's true, but you know, in my experience, changing is more risky than not changing. So if you do nothing and keep getting good results, you'll keep getting promoted and you'll keep getting bonuses. If you change something and the results get worse, that's probably not going to go well. So we are risk averse as humans. I understand why we're risk averse, because we're punished when things go wrong. So the short answer is you probably won't get deep change from that person. Now, what you might do is you might be able to get small incremental change from that person and say, hey, this small thing over here, we might be able to do a little bit better against whatever metric they value if we did this. And you run that small experiment and hey, maybe we get a bit better. So then you say, maybe we do a small change over here and maybe we get a bit better. So you probably won't get wholesale change to agile leadership, but what you might get is a more incremental approach by trying small things. I think that's probably the best you'll do when someone is so clearly getting good results and so clearly having their needs met that they don't have an imperative to change. So you'll have to start a lot smaller. Maybe you kind of convince them that this is something that's not risky and can only really lead to benefit. But then once you do that, you have to show that there are benefits for them to keep doing it. That's really all you can do. But if you know, as you probably know, the coaches in the room, you have to serve your client's agenda. And if your client's agenda is to stay the same, then you kind of have to serve that, right? Which is frustrating, I know, but small steps. So thanks for listening, folks. I know I have a habit of blasting you with a lot of information. That's my style. I talk a lot. I talk quickly, hopefully not too quickly for you, and I squeeze a lot into a short space of time. So hopefully you can go and rewatch that and maybe digest some of the things I talked about there. There's a lot more reading around the topic. If you want to be pointed in the direction, I can send you a reading list if you want to go deeper.
Yes, that would be great, actually, Karim.
All right. Yeah. Do you know what? I'll just put it in the chat now,
Yes.
because otherwise I'll forget.
Okay.
So I have as part of my, you know what? I'll share my screen just to show you where I've gone. So if you go to my book site here, and I put the link in the chat. So you'll go here and you want to go to free resources, right? So there's a bunch of stuff in here. There's a few things actually. So list of further reading. It's broken down by chapter in my book, right? So there's a couple around business agility, and then chapter 4 is, I believe, leadership and management. So there are all of these things. We've got a culture reading list here. We've got an org structure. We've got a HR reading list, governance and funding, various bits and bobs. So there's that. The other thing you might be interested in is I have an employee engagement assessment. All of those things I talked about: trust, transparency, psychological safety. It's all free. You can just download it all. There's a bunch of stuff on there basically. So if you just head over to that site, then feel free to check out what you want.
Okay. Just to let you know that you weren't sharing your screen, you were in the QR code. We scan it, some of us, so we could see the topics. But in case you want to,
let me try that again then, because if you couldn't see, can you see that now?
yes.
All right. It's late. I'm tired. Free resources. There you go. So what I clicked on was this further reading here, so you can see by chapter. So the leadership is chapter 4 in the book. So this is the leadership and management section here. Chapter 5 is culture, and you might be also interested in chapter 7, people and engagement, which is about HR. So that's what I was trying to show you. And also down here, employee engagement assessment. There you go. It's just a run through of all of the things I mentioned about employee engagement, how your organization's doing. There's a bunch of free stuff on there. So if you just want to click on free resources, then on 6enablers.com, you will find a load of stuff, and hopefully you saw it that time.
No worries. Thanks for everything.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me.
And well, see you around in any
Yes.
conference or retreat or whatever.
Yeah, I'm going to be in Ghent if anyone's going to be there at the Scrum gathering. So come and say hello. Otherwise, sorry again for being late, and I will see you all around. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys for joining.
Hope to see you next time with our,
Next time.
what's our next event? When?
Next event is in 2 weeks about ethics and AI in Agile development.
Yes.
Okay. So
See you then.
see you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you later. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye, καλές ποτάρες, παιδιά.
Bye bye.